Hello, creative people. Thanks for tuning into Melody or Witchcraft. I'm your host, Catherine Petricelli. On the podcast, we hear a poet read a work of their own and an Emily Dickinson poem of their choosing that contributed to their work. We discuss poetry, Dickinson, the fluidity of time, and the scope and sources of creative inspiration. The past is such a curious creature, Dickinson wrote. Join us to find out how it can teach us about our now.
How dreary to be. I'm ceded. I've stopped being theirs. The name they dropped upon my face with water in the country church is finished using now. And they can put it with my dolls, my childhood, and the string of spools. I finished threading too. Baptized before without the choice, but this time consciously of grace, unto supremest name, called to my full, the crescent dropped, existence's whole arc filled up with one small diadem. My second rank too small the first, crowned, crowing on my father's breast, a half unconscious queen, but this time adequate, erect, with will to choose or to reject, and I choose just a crown.
That was Jennifer Franklin reading Emily Dickinson. Jennifer Franklin is a poet, professor, and editor whose last book is If Some God Shakes Your House, 4-Way Books, 2023. Her work has been commissioned by the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and her awards include a Pushcart Prize, an NYFA City Artist Corps grant, and residencies from the T.S. Eliot Foundation and Café Royal Cultural Foundation. Her publications include the Paris Review, The Nation, Poets.org, and Poetry in Motion from the Poetry Society of America. She leads manuscript revision workshops and teaches in Manhattanville's MFA program. Welcome, Jennifer. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me today, Catherine.
As you know, you have been at the top of my list for folks to talk to for the podcast, not just because of your love of Dickinson, but because of how deeply you do tap into voices of the past in your work and how you are in conversation with these historical characters and historical figures. But I am kind of ahead of myself because I don't want to lose the thread of I'm ceded. And maybe we could talk a little bit about this incredible poem of agency.
Yes, this is my favorite of all of Dickinson's poems.
Wow.
It is, and there's so many, obviously, to choose from, and so many I love. When I took a class on Dickinson in my first year of MFA at Columbia with Alice Quinn, she actually had us memorize several Dickinson poems over the course of the semester. So this is not the one I chose, but this is one I've really come to love and has layers of meanings for me. I used the first few lines of this poem in my undergraduate thesis, which was a series of poems written from the point of view of my grandmother and each of her 3 sisters who came over from Palermo as Italian immigrants and settled in the Bronx. And this is the one that I used for my great aunt, the I'm ceded part.
Wow.
Because
you have really from the beginning been tapping into those voices from decades back. So just to remind folks of those first lines, I'm ceded, I've stopped being theirs. The name they dropped upon my face with water in the country church is finished using now, etc. We could just read it again over and over. It's stunning and amazing to say that it's your favorite out of 1,789.
I think it's one of the things that you said earlier about it's a great poem of agency. Of course, Dickinson's voice is strong in so many of the poems, But this one is really reads like a manifesto. I've stopped being theirs is the phrase that really grabbed me. I remember the first time I read that. I've stopped being theirs, and they can put it with my dolls, my childhood, and the string of spools. I finished threading too. She's done with being told what she needs to do, what the ideas of girlhood and womanhood are. And as you know, as we know, she never married. She stayed in her house. She was really in charge of her own destiny. She tended to her garden. She baked. She wrote letters. She saw people when she wanted to see people. I think that a lot of us can relate to the idea of having to live up to a prescribed version of what a girl and what a woman is supposed to do and supposed to be. It starts very young that we're told what we're supposed to do, including playing with dolls.
Right.
So this poem has meant so much to me for so many decades.
Yeah, it is really great. And it's funny, I was just looking for something I wanted to comment on in the poem and realized it's actually in your poem that we're going to read in a little bit. So, I mean, the layers are, it's really there. I was really noticing too the repetition of phrases in this poem. I have to go back, but I don't know that I see it in lots of Dickinson poems. We've got the name they dropped upon my face, and then we have the crescent dropped.
Mhm.
We've got, but this time consciously. And then we have a half unconscious queen, but this time adequate, erect. And we have the repetition of crown. And it's very interesting how she's coming back. It's, I suppose we could say, slightly on the longer side for Dickinson, or maybe
Yes.
average.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you really get her voice in this and the strength of her voice and her conviction. Because one of the things that's so amazing about Dickinson is her ability to look at things from different angles and Keats's negative capability to really be able to hold several things at one time. But this poem, she really is coming down on one side. She's saying she's ceded, she stopped being theirs. And she has will to choose or to reject. And she realizes that she does have that will and she's going to use it. It's, I think, a very inspiring poem, a poem of strength, autonomy. And I used it in my first book as one of the section breaks when I am kind of moving from my poems of, young adulthood to motherhood and saying, I've stopped being theirs, the family of origin.
Yes. Oh, I can so see that. The one thing I'm curious about your take on this. First of all, we have in the third stanza this lovely visual rhyme of crowned crowing, and then on my father's breast. So often, despite Dickinson challenging everything from her own pronouns to what a woman was supposed to do in 19th century New England, when she personifies, say, a natural element, more often than not, it's male. And
Mhm.
here we have her on my father's breast. There's, of course, the exception of the soul selects her own society. The soul is her.
Right.
But so often those personifications are male. Any thought? Is it just reflecting back the society?
I think there was so much in that household that the father was so dominant, and he had that wonderful library that she was so enamored with. And I think there's also an element of conflating father with God as well. I think that could potentially be part of what she's doing there. I love thinking about the master letters too, as who is this master? Is it God? Is it a lover that we don't know the gender of? Are they the first epistolary poems of Dickinson, the first and only epistolary poems? They're just so beautiful. They really read as poetry. I connected a little bit to what she does there with the master letters, and there's so much male imagery in those.
So we've got, as you've referenced to some extent, Emily the baker, Emily the spiritual seeker, Emily the poet, Emily the letter writer, the devoted sister. Is there one version of her that maybe stands out for you when you're thinking about who she is? Is there a part of her story that resonates most strongly?
That's a great question. I like to try to think of her, all of her pieces, as a whole, like the Jungian completion of a person, with all of the elements that may be warring against each other. My mentor at Columbia, Richard Howard, the poet and critic and translator, he used to say, "We have yet to catch up with Emily Dickinson's genius." And I really think that that's true. I went from studying at Brown with my other mentor, Arnold Weinstein, and he taught a class called Exile and the Conditions of Writing, where we read poetry by poets who had been either literally or figuratively exiled, like Ovid and Jufu, and then the Romantics who felt alienated and exiled. And when he taught Dickinson, he used the term insile, that she kind of exiled herself inward to her own interiority a lot. And it produced obviously such incredible work that she knew she was making a sacrifice, I think, to cut herself off from seeing people often, but she had this incredible work that she was so serious about doing. I particularly love Emily the Reader, Emily the Gardener, Emily the Letter Writer, and of course, Emily the Poet.
Amazing. And do you teach Dickinson?
I
And
do.
how do you
And
teach her? What does that look
well,
like?
I just taught After Great Pain, a Formal Feeling Comes. And that was the poem that I memorized for Alice's class at Columbia. And I was so happy to see the undergraduates last night really loving that poem and loving the M dash and saying that they're upset to hear that AI has co-opted the M dash and that that's something that now people are thinking, if people use M dashes in poetry, that there was AI had a hand in writing it.
Oh
Whereas these
no.
kids are inspired by Emily Dickinson and her use of the M dash. So I was interested to see this group of 18-year-olds really loving that poem and getting it, really having a lot of interesting takes on it and loving the imagery at the end and loving the language. It's always interesting to me to see, what people find to like about Dickinson. It's usually the imagery, the language, kind of coming at things slant, looking at things in a completely different way. Once you hear it, it seems inevitable that you would use some of her metaphors. So they feel true. They feel very real.
Yes. Well, and I can only imagine that your passion for Dickinson comes through to your students as well. And I'm sure that that is part of what they are picking up on when they are embracing her. I wonder if we can read the poem that you brought of your own
Sure.
as Antigone.
Yes, this poem is from my book, If Some God Shakes Your House. It's from the point of view of a contemporary Antigone, but I think also inspired by I'm Seated, I've Stopped Being Theirs by Dickinson. As Antigone, I'm all done being nice. It hasn't gotten me anywhere. Since I was young, I gave everything away: milk, money, homework, adoration. Everyone wanted to make me into a small version of herself, teaching me weaving, writing, wiles. All I wanted was love, picked a bouquet of dandelions and handed it to my mother. When she turned her mouth into a little O and called the tight yellow suns weeds, my body became a weight I wanted to let go. I thought of all the lessons I memorized to keep me still, the colors I couldn't wear because they clashed with my red hair, all the rules of modesty so men would not look at me with hunger. The only thing I owned was a jar I was given like Pandora as a girl. Before I unlatched the lid, I had already lost everything: faith, health, my child. I refused to watch what flew out, but something hard as lapis, real as want, wrenched my wrist right back, so hope remained, writhing alone at the bottom of the jar, like dirty water after dead tulips are discarded, yellow stamens dropping pollen to the floor. Silent, it watched me for years, months at a time. I forgot it was there. But when it's trapped like that, it grows so large, nothing can quell it. No one thanks me for what I have done, but I don't need praise anymore. I turned weeds into flowers.
Absolutely lovely.
Thank you.
And for those that may just be listening and not looking at the poem right now, I just want to call out its form, which is, if I counted correctly, 23 couplets, short lined couplets that run down the page a bit like a trail or a train there. And really lovely, these examples early on of that naive youth. I gave everything away. Milk, line break, money, milk money, in other words, homework, adoration, etc. So, this idea of coming into oneself, it fits perfectly with where you were saying the Dickinson poem was placed in your book to transition in sort of those life phases. And this so visceral description, about a third of the way into the poem, my body became a weight I wanted to let go. Just gorgeous. We're in the hands of a fine poet there.
Thank you.
Are you here kind of using Dickinson's ideas and themes to understand another figure, to understand the self, or understand Antigone, or Antigone as the self? Or is it a conflation? Tell us a little bit about how you see the poem.
My teacher at Columbia, Lucy Brock-Broido, used to talk about persona poems being a marriage of the poet's voice and the character that she's trying to embody. So in these poems, I'm trying to use the character of Antigone as we have come to know her, this fierce, obsessed person who believes in a moral code, that she knows what is right and what is wrong, and she is willing to die for it. That kind of tunnel vision to do what she thinks is necessary, it of course is her undoing. And so I'm very attracted to the characters with their tragic flaw and maybe being unable to see that tragic flaw themselves. In this poem, I think that I wasn't consciously channeling Dickinson, but I think that because that poem has lived inside me so long, I made those connections later, that Ceded has informed the argument of this poem. But really, when I sat down to write it, I was just thinking about my feelings and what I imagined Antigone's feelings were in those moments where she was burying her brother's body. And then, even though she knew she was going to be killed for it, when they unburied it, she reburied it again. That conviction that there were some things that were worth more than life, and some things that were worse than death. And I think some things being worse than death has been something on my mind since I was very young. And I learned about the Holocaust at a very young age. This idea of certain things being worse than death, torture being worse than death, things like that informed this poem as well. So it wasn't an overt calling to the poem of Dickinson, but I think, of course, like a lot of my poems, her arguments and her perspectives on things are there.
My Dickinson antennas are going crazy because of the filter that we're looking at these through. But even with the lessons I memorized to keep me still, right? They shut me up and closed. And the red hair, which you share with Dickinson. Many people don't know that Dickinson had red hair, but she did. And then we get this interesting little kind of passing reference to hope as well that
I'm
goes
glad you brought up
by.
the hope because even though in this poem I was thinking of because of the Greek mythology and the Greek character in this poem of Antigone, I brought in Pandora when I was talking about hope. But there was, of course, Dickinson in the background of hope is a thing with feathers. Jane Hirschfield says hope is the hardest love we carry. I
Mm,
think that because of the things in my own personal life that have been so difficult and some of them even tragic, with my daughter's debilitating disability, hope I've had to nurture and I've had to really hold on to. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gotten through. And otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to do the things that I've had to do day in and day out to help her. Hope is something that I have had to kind of quietly nurture the same way I quietly nurtured my poetry in interstitial moments when my daughter was sleeping, I wasn't taking care of her or the house or doing work. It's always been something I've done kind of in the middle of the night in stolen moments. I think that part of what sustained me is my love for poetry. So I'm trying to sort of bring all of this together into this poem and show the way that hope kind of was this guiding light for me, even in hopeless times.
I don't know if this is just asking the same question in a different way, revisiting what we're already talking about, but if so, so be it. I'm interested in the role of time in your work.
Mm,
And it's difficult to even form a question around I
mm,
find, but it's something I'm really poking at a lot. And it's
yeah,
hard to ask somebody, why are you the way you are? I mean,
right.
sometimes I think that's what we really are asking each other, well, how did you come to be this way? And but all that inspiration that you take and not just inspiration, but advancing what you digest from these various people, whether it be Dickinson, whether it be Antigone, whether it be, I know you have a project around Lucia Joyce and your forthcoming book next year as well, Virginia Woolf. So many big personalities, big voices from the past that
Mm.
speak through you.
Yeah, I think I've been inspired for a long time by something Louise Glück said. Louise Glück is my favorite contemporary poet. She recently passed away, I know, but she has been my favorite living poet for many, many years. She says poems do not endure as objects, but as presences. When you read anything worth remembering, you liberate a human voice. You release into the world again a companion spirit. I read poems to hear that voice, she says, and I write to speak to those I have heard. And I think this is from the same interview where she talks about that from when she was a very young child. These were her friends, these poets, Eliot and Dickinson and Keats, they were her friends, and Blake. I had a similar experience growing up. I grew up as kind of awkward, lonely, bookish child in the suburbs of southern New Jersey near a beach town where really the only path for a young girl was sports or going to the beach every day and to get a tan. And I can't tan and I'm no good at sports. And so I had books and I really lived in books. So books were more real to me, and the characters in the books and the writers who wrote the books, even though they were long dead usually, were more real to me than people. So I sort of felt like these were my friends too. And so they informed my path, going to Brown at 17. I wanted to be a writer from the time I was 4. My mom used to buy me first all the Anna Green Gables books and then early on Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights. And those books, maybe I read them when I was too young, they made a very deep impact on me. And I knew I wanted to be a writer. So when I went to Brown, I wanted to start taking writing classes and showed my poems to my academic advisor Arnold Weinstein, and he said, well, you need to apply to be in advanced poetry classes, not just the basic ones, the intro to poetry. So I did. I listened to him. I took a leap and I studied with Michael Harper there. He introduced me to a lot of Irish writers in office hours. He loved Yeats. And then in class, he only had us read Black poets who I hadn't really up until then been exposed to. And I fell in love with the work of Rita Dove in particular, but also Lucille Clifton. And then I got to work with Lucille Clifton for a semester at Columbia, and she was an amazing teacher. Rita Dove has been, other than Louise Glick, has been the biggest contemporary influence on my work. And she wrote this wonderful book, Mother Love, about Persephone and Demeter. And my first book, Looming, has a whole section on Persephone and Demeter. And of course, Louise Glick and Laurie Scheck also wrote about that myth. And I wanted to see if I could do something a little bit different, but in conversation with their work. And so I think that reading a lot really informed the way I approach writing. And most of what I read in my earlier years was fiction. And I even was a fiction major in college. So I minored in creative writing, but studied the modernist novels. So James Joyce and Proust and Virginia Woolf and Faulkner. And so I have all of these great characters that were created by these writers living kind of with me in my mind at all times. So it's a great source of inspiration. It may not be what most people want to read about, but it's what I like to write about, and ekphrastic poems about art.
Absolutely. And maybe we could just close with this question. When you are writing with all of these voices that you're carrying, and perhaps intentionally, for example, trying to be in conversation with another writer or another voice, what are your big concerns? What are you thinking you most prominently want to honor, want to do or not do? How much is just kind of naturally coming out of you?
Mhm. Yeah, it's a good question. I'm particularly interested in women artists and women writers, especially the women writers whose voice has been thwarted in some way. We're very lucky that we have so many letters from Dickinson, but we're not as lucky, and also we have them for Woolf. But for someone like Lucia Joyce, who I'm writing epistolary poems to Virginia Woolf, Lucia Joyce, and Sylvia Plath, and they all live in the same book. There's a poem that I have at the end of that book where I use quotes from all of them and have them talk to each other from their own words. I'm always trying to say to the reader, there's so much that we don't know, and there's so much we can never know. And with someone like Lucia, whose uncle burned her novel, burned almost all of her letters, and burned other creative work, some poems that she had written, we will never know. We just know that she was an extremely talented dancer, that she was institutionalized for what several therapists back then thought was schizophrenia, and a lot of doctors now, are very skeptical about it and think that she was just a genius in the same way that Joyce was a genius, and that she wasn't able to express it because she was forced to stop dancing. So I think one of my main concerns is women being able to speak. And clearly, I can't speak for them, but I can point a flashlight onto their lives and say, look at these amazing lives and what they have done and have accomplished. There's so much that we will never know about what they did or what they could have done had the world and had society been different, and had they been allowed to do what most men are allowed to do and do what they want to do and have more agency. And that goes back to Dickinson for me, that in the context of her time, she was so able to do so much. And a lot of it was because she decided not to marry. Same with Jane Austen, not marrying. I think that, for example, Sylvia Plath, we saw what marriage did for her. So I guess one of the concerns I have is just trying to help create an environment where we listen to women and girls. Of course, we could talk about this forever, but in this
100%.
particular time, it's a very prevalent political topic of listening to women and girls and believing women and girls. And I think that so much could be changed in our world if we did. And so I guess I kind of wanted just to shed a light on the creativity and the artistic prowess of so many of these women writers and artists and painters, and what they were able to do even with everything kind of working against them.
We're going to end there on artistic prowess of women and girls. I love that. Jennifer Franklin, it's been a real pleasure to spend this time with you.
Thank you so much for having me, Catherine. It's been wonderful talking with you today about Dickinson.
Thanks for being with us today for Melody or Witchcraft. You can find out more about today's guest by going to JenniferFranklinPoet.com. Our theme music is by Emma Wallace. The podcast is available on all the usual platforms. And for more information, join the Ask the Poet Substack, where you can also find the show notes from today's show. Please comment, like, restack, recommend. We'd love to hear from you.
There's a